Did Jesus preach universalism? It's an odd question because you have to almost assume that Jesus then would be responding to the centuries of theological development that came after him. I think he preached the same direction towards God that at least as a universalist I preach, and that God overcomes our expectations, that God is love, that God is personal, that God cares for us, that God cares for the least of us, and by that I mean when we feel like we are the least also. So it's not so much that would Jesus drop into this sort of sectarian continuum and go, oh, I'll pick the universalists because they've got the right answers. Because we've certainly made a lot of mistakes over the years. It's that when we identify what is true through Jesus' teachings, we come up with an approach that God is love and that it resists boundaries. And it's not so much would Jesus preach universalism, but in preaching Jesus, are we trustworthily universalists? And I think the answer is yes.
What did Jesus believe about it? We can only go by what he says, and he's much more concerned about things in this world. Jesus is most of the sayings we have of Jesus, the vast majority of them, when they're not dealing with the coming of the end, and things of that nature, which are very few, and also open to controversy, are basically how do we get along with one another and love each other and love God and love neighbor and things of that nature. So they're very clearly ethical in nature. The teachings we have of Jesus regarding Gehenna do not speak in terms of it being an everlasting hell.
Jesus didn't teach a lot of things, including the Trinity, for example. Nobody teaches the doctrine of the Trinity. There's lots of things that are important to Christian life and stuff that Jesus didn't explicitly teach. Jesus didn't teach universal salvation, but neither did he say anything that's incompatible with it. So the question is, how do we hold the whole of Scripture together? And Jesus' teaching is obviously central to that. But it's not the only part of that. So we're holding Jesus' teaching together with Paul and James and Revelation and the whole lot. So it doesn't concern me that not everything the Bible teaches was taught explicitly by Jesus. It would matter if what Jesus said ruled out what I think these other biblical texts say about universal salvation, but I don't think it does. There are hints, you could see hints in what Jesus says so for example, everyone will be salted by fire. He's referring to hell. You could see that imagery of salt as a purification kind of thing, and you could see Jesus offering an understanding of hell in that Mark passage in terms of a purification process. But I think, I wouldn't want to build too much on that. I think it's really when you situate Jesus' teaching within the whole canon of Scripture that it can be read that way. But I don't think what Jesus says on his own would make you a universalist. So Jesus' parables teach a coming judgment and a separation. And there's various parables that do this in different ways. You've got wheat and weeds, which are separated. You've got sheep and goats, good fish and bad fish, and so on. So you've got this idea of a judgment and a separation. And the separation is connected with different fates. Life of the age to come and the punishment of the age to come, which is associated with darkness, cast into outer darkness, which is an image that's drawn from everyday life in a society where they didn't have electric lighting in the streets and stuff, and there's a guy who's thrown out of a party into the outer darkness. I mean, the image is being thrown out into the night outside, and it's about exclusion. So you have these, and fire, you've got the image of fire and worms and anguish, gnashing of teeth, and all of these kind of things are associated with the fate of that separation. So I think if you had nothing else to go on, then I think it would be reasonable to think that's the end of the story. The reason I don't think it's the end of the story is when you situate those teachings within the wider biblical canon, particularly the rest of the New Testament, which also has similar teachings. I mean, Paul teaches this judgment and division after judgment and different fates, but he also teaches at the same time this more universal salvation picture. So Paul is teaching both of them at the same time. And again, I'm proposing, well, not just me, this tradition I represent poses a particular way of trying to hold that together, and at the same time then shows us how to integrate Jesus' teaching into that while doing justice to it. You know, it's not about saying we don't agree with Jesus. Gosh, that would be a weird Christian view.
You know, the way Jesus expressed himself, using parables, colorful stories, hyperbole, means that he's not going to be the source of final answers to our theological questions. It seems as if he expresses himself in a way explicitly designed to allow us to reinterpret things as we mature in the faith. So, but you know, when he says, when I'm lifted up, I will draw all men, it's always all men, but really, you could translate that all humans. But I will draw all men, drag in the way that you would drag fishes in with a net, to myself. That certainly implies something like universal reconciliation.